And
Yeah.
did you send an email with like what specific word discovered like you did last time, or no? Just the whole thing?
Yeah, just whatever, 22 words, I think. Okay. Friday, we ended by looking at this particular document. Not necessarily an important document in Georgia history or U.S. history or really in history at all, but it is important because it gives us a glimpse into what it might have been like to come to this new world. And not only that, it is important because we actually own this document. It is in our archives over in the library. So we have the original, and because of that, we're able to pull it out, we're able to look at it, and we're able to do things like transcribe. And I did that for you, so you don't have to do it. And hopefully you took a look at it, or you will take a look at it, and see exactly what this document was about. It gives instructions for how people are to sleep, what they're going to be able to eat, what kind of access to water and to the fire they will have. How many? There's 60 people that are going to be on this ship traveling from the old world to the new. And then how much it's going to cost. What is the passage going to cost each person? So, hopefully you found that interesting, at least the document part of it. Primary sources, we'll continue to work with primary sources. We'll use a lot of pictures as primary sources, particularly as we get into the Civil War, because there's a bunch of them out there. And every one of them tells a story that is worth hearing. All right. So we're going to move on from that particular document, talking about the Salzburger, to talking about another type of people that came to Georgia, the Moravians. And they, like the Salzburgers, come in search of religious freedom. They are from what was then Bohemia. Today it's the Czech Republic, or if you're more familiar with Czechoslovakia, then that's where they're from. They came to Georgia in 1735, and their purpose for coming is to unite all of Christianity under one flag. They want to unify all Christians worldwide, which is a noble cause. It's a noble undertaking. There's only one problem. The Moravians are human, and they don't get along with the Lutherans. So they have problems with the Salzburgers. They don't last very long. You can imagine a group that wants to unify all of Christianity, but they can't get along with a particular sect of Christianity. You can imagine they would not last very long, and they don't. In Georgia, the community dissolves around 1745. People disband. They go other places. There is a Moravian church, rather, left in Georgia today. That's in Stone Mountain, in the city of Stone Mountain. So they can't get along with a group of people. And they go on their way. A couple of Moravian leaders, Augustus Gottlieb Spangenberg, interesting name, and then Count Nicholas Ludwig von Zinzendorf. Their names are unusual, and that's not why I mention them. I mention the Moravians because religious diversity. You see, there are people who are seeking the same thing that come to Georgia, but they come from different backgrounds. They're both seeking religious freedom, or they're seeking religious freedom, but yet they're different. And so the Moravians are just an example of that. Now, this next group, the Highland Scots, they're probably my favorite group of immigrants that come to Georgia in the 1730s. They established a settlement on are near, rather, Darien, what is now Darien, Georgia. It's the southern frontier. They're about as far south as anybody else. In fact, they are not surrounded by friendly people. They would still be dealing with Native American, probably, but they're also the first people the Spanish would encounter if they were to come across the Georgia mainland. In fact, that's their purpose. They're here to defend Georgia from the Spanish. James Oglethorpe made a point of going out and recruiting the Highland Scots because they like to fight and they're pretty good at it. They are, if you wanted to think about it in today's terms, they would be like the Marine Corps or Special Forces. They are an elite fighting force. Whose stuff am I picking up? Huh? Might be yours. Could be. So they, Georgia's supposed to be a buffer from the Spanish, and in reality, the Highland Scots become that buffer. They are the first people the Spaniards will encounter as they try to invade South Carolina through Georgia. And just in case you're wondering, they would not wear anything under their kilts. There's at least one Highland Scot who plays a very pivotal role in Georgia history as we encounter or as we get closer to the Revolution. And you'll meet him and you'll recognize he likes to fight, and he was pretty good at it. Now, speaking of religious diversity again, in 1733, those 114 people land at Yamacraw Bluff, and during that first year, 40 of them die. So things are not going on well. It's probably waterborne disease from drinking impure water, malaria, those sorts of original settlers die. In July of 1733, there are 42 Jews who just show up at James Oglethorpe's door. Coming, and when they get there, he doesn't know what to do with them. They are a surprise, to say the least. But he has to do something with them, and they have done their homework. They have gone to a lawyer in Charleston. They land in South Carolina first. They go to a lawyer, have him examine the trustee charter, and lo and behold, there is no prohibition against Jews coming into Georgia. All it says is you can't be a Catholic. All non-Catholics are allowed into Georgia. So in reality, Oglethorpe's hands are tied. He has no choice but to let them in. He does. He doesn't have time to contact the other trustees because that's a 4-month process. And he allows the Jews in. And it's really a good thing that he does because among them is a doctor. And they desperately need a doctor. Theirs was dead. The one that came with them originally was dead. And so Dr. Samuel Nunez, is able to step in and is credited with saving the lives of many of the people of Savannah. Savannah today has has the second largest Jewish population in Georgia. The first would be in Atlanta. But the congregation Mikveh Israel is the third oldest Jewish synagogue or congregation in the United States, and there's a picture of it right there. So if you go to, or a picture of the building, so if you go to Savannah, that's one of those places you can go and visit and see. Okay. So a lot of different kinds of people. have come. Some of those people become malcontents. And if you're malcontent, that means you're unhappy. So there are people who come to Georgia who become very unhappy with the policies of the trustees, the laws that have been put in place, the policies that have been put in place. They don't like the fact that they can't own slaves. They don't like the fact that they can't own more than 500 acres. They don't like the fact that rum is outlawed in Georgia. And so they begin to speak out. Led by a man named Patrick Tallifer, they speak out and they protest against the trustees and their laws. The trustees, in response to that, write basically a brochure by William Stevens, and he says everything's fine. The people in Georgia like the policies of the trustees. Patrick Tallifer writes in response to that a true and historical narrative of the colony of Georgia in America, and basically it dispels what William Stevens had written earlier. And so they won't change. And the question becomes for us, do they eventually get their way? We'll see. Maybe they don't. Maybe they don't. All right. Real quick, about a 7-minute little video about this time frame that we're talking about. So sit back, stay awake. Don't put your head on the desk. And let's watch.
Imagine America in the 1730s in a way the history books have never shown. Pretend for a moment that television news existed back then. I know they didn't have TV back in 1730, but imagine if they did. What would a news report from the new town Savannah have? Let's find out as we join the colonial evening news and muffins. The Colonial Evening News with Jonathan Patrick, live from Williamsburg.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Patrick. In the news tonight, the war for throne succession has taken a dramatic turn as King Stanislaw I has been deposed and replaced by Augustus III. Philadelphia's province Hall after more than 3 years of his life. And Boston printer Benjamin Franklin's Coleridge's Almanac celebrates its 2nd year of publication, and already such maxims as a penny saved is a penny earned are becoming part of the American message. Now, our cover story tonight, the new Georgia colony. It is America's youngest colony, the 13th name for our beloved His Royal Majesty King George VI. It is a long place, perched between the Savannah and the Altamont Rivers on our southern frontier. Cats and mosquitoes, heat, illness, Spanish attack are but a few of the challenges facing this new Georgia colony. But a small group of dedicated colonists from the London area, led by philanthropist and utopian idealist James Oglethorpe, are determined to make a go of it. Correspondent Rebecca Wright is with us now, live from the outpost known as Savannah, for an exclusive first-hand look at how the new Georgia colonists are. Rebecca.
Well, John, it's more than a year after the first colonists stepped off of the Anne onto Georgian soil, and Savannah is really beginning to look and feel like a town. There are finished houses, streets, even public squares. Despite the early hardships, illness, and death faced by these loyal British subjects, Savannah and Georgia appear to have a good chance at succeeding beyond the trustees' initial hopes and plans. Why did you decide to come to Georgia anyway?
Well, for new opportunities and adventures. My husband is here, and my family are here with me, so we're going to make a go of it.
It all started with James Oglethorpe. He dreamed of a place where people could live and work without fear of death or prison. In fact, Georgia was not founded as a debtor's colony, although some colonists have been debtors in the past. Instead, the first colonists were the working poor, craftsmen, farmers, and shopkeepers. King George George liked Oglethorpe's plan. He saw George's potential for producing silk, indigo for dyes, and tobacco. Besides, Queen Caroline wanted more silk dresses, and the supply of silk from China and Europe was limited. More than 114 colonists and their families made the Atlantic crossing to America on the Anne. 2 infants died on board. Another was baptized, a boy named Georgius. And unfortunately, a dog was lost overboard. They arrived at Charlestown, South Carolina in mid-January 1733. Soon Oglethorpe found a place upriver to build what he called Savannah, on a high bluff called Yamacraw. Well, what did you think the moment you first arrived in Savannah?
The marsh was beautiful. It was something I'd never seen before. Grass is growing all along the riverside like that. And there were trees everywhere. And the lack of buildings, the lack of civilian life, it was drastically different.
What about the weather?
Weather was hot, humid, and the insects. There are insects that you can't even see. The Indians call them no-see-ums. And it's very difficult to see that they bite and leave us dreams.
Oglethorpe designed a town with public squares and wide boulevards. Indian chief Tomachichi and his tribe have welcomed the Georgia colonists and have helped them adapt to this new and strange land. The Native Americans seem eager to trade, and some even have interest in Christianity. But amid the progress, there are rumors of discontent. Is everyone getting along within this community?
That's a question you have to ask my husband.
Mary Tate's husband and others were unwilling to say anything that would upset Oglethorpe, whom they call father. But there is grumbling about rum and slaves. Both are forbidden by the royal charter. The trustees fear that rum and slaves would encourage laziness in a plantation economy. But this wilderness is much more difficult to tame than had been anticipated. Slaves would ease that burden. In fact, we have evidence that some colonists are renting slaves from South Carolina plantation owners just across the river. Nonetheless, most of the families we talk to say they are doing well.
Well, for the children, kids are fine. If they're adjusting well, it's all in your hands. And they're very happy.
Elizabeth, you've been living in Savannah for about a year now. What do you miss most from home?
Probably my friends, the parties, the city life.
The dress is very pretty, but it's more of a practical dress. You miss some of the beautiful, rich cloths that come from England.
Well, definitely the dresses were a lot bigger and I was feeling a lot more. But after a year, you get
Are you making friends here?
pretty much. The rest of my friends are back in England, about 2 or 3 of them.
Oh, that's good. Well, maybe you can correspond with them and send them letters.
Well, I tried to write on my phone a letter. I still haven't gotten a response.
How long ago was that?
About 6 months ago.
The illness and death that first summer nearly overwhelmed this young settlement. Nearly 1/3 of the original settlers died. No one knows the cause, but it appears that bad water from the marsh and the extreme heat are a lethal combination. But now Savannah's population is growing, around 500. The colony of Georgia has been called by some Oglethorpe's Folly. Others have a contrary view. That Georgia and her vast riches of timber and other natural resources will soon prove a valuable jewel in the crown of Britain and America. But Jonathan, only time will tell which view is more accurate.
Now, Rebecca, is it fair to say that Georgia is more valuable to the crown as a barrier against a possible invasion of the American colonies from French and Spanish holdings to the south?
Georgia trustees believe that Savannah and its outlying settlements and farms will act as a buffer between nations hostile to the Crown and Carolina. The question is whether or not this threat can be held at bay by the mere presence of the Georgia colony, or will James Oglethorpe and the colonists have to use force to protect themselves and our southern homes?
Interesting story that in other news, Nadir Shah has been named one of the great Asian conquerors of all time after defeating the Ottoman Turks.
With its many squares and symmetrical layout, Savannah is known as the first planned city in America.
All righty. So, let's move on from that and talk about war. Talk about killing folks. The War of Jenkins' Ear. And I'm going to let you just think about that one for a minute. But the War of Jenkins' Ear is actually part of a much broader war, really a world war that takes place in the 1700s, 1740s. Not a world war in that all of the world was involved with it, but a world war because it really spanned the globe. Because you're talking about two different countries, England and Spain, that have literally conquered the world. And they are in a disagreement about land rights and sailing rights, where they can sail their ships. And it's bad enough that we see state-sponsored terrorism. We see state-sponsored piracy. Spain and England support raiding each other's ships, just like a pirate. Arg, that kind of thing. And basically it is. It's state-sponsored piracy. And as you can imagine, neither side is very happy. And Spain captures the ship of Robert Jenkins. They accuse him of being a pirate, which of course he was, and they cut off his ear. He keeps his ear. He preserves it because he wants to be buried with every body part that he was born with. And he's not the last to do something like that. But he has a purpose for keeping it. It's not necessarily because he wants to be buried with it. He wants to present it to the Prime Minister of England. And he does. A couple of years later, he's able to make his way back to London. He takes his ear to Parliament and presents it to the Prime Minister. Why does he do that? He's looking for revenge. He wants retribution. He wants England to declare war on Spain and restore his honor. And that's exactly what England does. They declare war on Spain. Is it because Robert Jenkins got his ear cut off? No. It is because they have been yah-yahing at each other for years now. This is the excuse that England's been looking for. This is, if you can think of Wile E. Coyote. Y'all have seen his cartoons, I'm sure. Incredibly violent. But if you remember, the coyote's always coming up with a big pile of explosives, got a big long fuse, takes out a match, lights the fuse, and then everything blows up. Well, that's exactly what Jenkins' ear was. Jenkins' ear was the match that lit that fuse. And we're going to see that in several different, in several different times, during several different times in Georgia history, as we're looking at worldwide events, or maybe they're Georgia events. There are things that lead up to it, and then there's that one thing. It's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, if you've ever heard that expression. In this case, it's the match that lights the fuse. And so Spain and England go to war. Does that impact Georgia? Yes, it does. But before we do that, there's the Prime Minister of England receiving the ear of Robert Jenkins. Robert Jenkins is the guy in the back who does not have on his wig showing where his ear was cut off. And that ear is somewhere on the table. Or the dog got it and is chewing it down there on the bottom. I don't know which. Yeah, it's pretty terrible, isn't it? Could you imagine if your dog brought you an ear? A human ear?
I'd probably laugh.
Oh. Anyway, there has been that Spanish threat from Florida. Oglethorpe has been concerned about it from the beginning because after Florida is explored, Spain makes it a colony. And Spain has always been very interested in expansion, has always been interested in moving north into Georgia. It might be yours. And so, remember, Oglethorpe places the Highland Scots at Darien, Georgia, south of Savannah. The British built Fort Frederica on St. Simon's Island. Why? To protect the colony from invasion by the Spanish from the sea. There's actually 2 islands built on St. Simon's, Fort Frederica and Fort St. Simon's. Fort St. Simon's is gone. I think you can still see the ruins of Fort Frederica if you visit St. Simon's today. It's been a long time since I've been to St. Simon's. Is Fort Frederica? Yeah, still there? Yeah. Fort St. Simon's is not. I'm pretty certain of that. Or if there is, there's not very much left of it. As part of this War of Jenkins' Ears, Oglethorpe leads Georgian soldiers to attack St. Augustine in 1740. It's not a huge success, and it's not a total failure. He doesn't do what he set out to do, and that was to capture or destroy St. Augustine, but he does get the attention of the Spanish. He and his men retreat to Fort Frederica, and they wait. What are they waiting on? The Spanish to come and attack them. It's kind of tit for tat. You attack me, I'll attack you. And they wait. They wait 2 years. 1742, the Spaniards attack St. Simon's, and of course, Fort Frederica is part of that attack. So 9 years after Oglethorpe comes to Georgia, his fears are finally realized. Only 9 years. His fears are realized. And the Spanish do attack Georgia. Here is Fort Frederica. Kind of a star-shaped fort, kind of open-ended to the sea so that they can fend off attacking ships. And I think this is the main road right here. It actually connected to Fort St. Simon's. Anyway, not all that important. 2 battles. The first is the Battle of Gully Hole Creek. There are 2 battles on St. Simon's Island, rather. The first is the Battle of Gully Hole Creek. It is decisive, and what we mean by decisive is there is a clear winner of this battle, and it is not the Spanish. The English clearly win the battle, but the Spanish do not quit. They do not leave the island. They are still looking to attack Fort Frederica. It is the more important because it opens up St. Simon's not only to the sea, but also to the land, or by land, to attack by land. So, it's July of 1742. What do you know about July in Georgia? It's hot, right? And again, the Spanish are wearing wool uniforms, and many of them succumb to heat. About a third of all the Spanish troops are lost either due to battle or fatigue, heat, whatever. But Spain doesn't quit. The British troops retreat back inside Fort Frederica, and they wait. What are they waiting for? For the Spaniards to attack again. And they do. But the British have a surprise waiting for them. As reserves come out of Fort St. Simons, they are ambushed, and they never show up on the battlefield. And again, it is a tremendous British victory. So the Battle of Gully Hole Creek leads to the Battle of Bloody Marsh. It's two battles, the Battle of Gully Hole Creek and the Battle of Bloody Marsh. And the Battle of Bloody Marsh is even more decisive than the Battle of Gully Hole Creek. This is the big battle. This is the main battle between troops from Georgia, troops from Spain. James Oglethorpe, of course, General James Oglethorpe leads his men into battle, and he is victorious in Georgia. Even though he has that semi-failure, he doesn't capture St. Augustine, he is able to defeat the Spanish and drive them out of Georgia. And the big victory is that Spain never again attacks a British colony on the East Coast. And in fact, we learned that Oglethorpe is an accomplished liar. He plants disinformation. He allows a Spanish soldier to overhear plans that are not actually correct. Gives him information that is not correct. He's released. He goes back. It makes its way to the governor of Florida. The governor of Florida believes what he's been told and withdraws Spanish troops from Georgia. And shortly after, Spain gives up all its claims to Georgia. Now, they still have a claim to a large portion of North America, but no longer do they claim Georgia. So Georgia's purpose as a buffer has been realized. They've been able to keep the Spanish from taking over the southeastern part of Georgia, or Georgia in general. Here is the map of the battles. There's Fort St. Simons up at the top, the military road, and that actually connects the two forts, and then Gully Hole Creek, and then you see Bloody Marsh. So reserves were coming out of Fort St. Simons. They are attacked by the Scottish Highlanders, the Highland Scots, and that turns that second battle. And they can't overcome that, so they just leave, never to return. Here's the monument at Bloody Marsh, erected many years ago. It's old. I mean, you can look at it and see it's old. But you can visit it. Put up by, who is that? The Society of Colonial Dames of America and the Georgia Society of Colonial Wars. And I'll tell you, there are not many battles that are fought in Georgia either during this time frame or during the Revolutionary War. There's a handful. There weren't as many as you might think in the Civil War. There's a handful. Of course, Chickamauga, we learned, we saw that today. The biggest battle that's ever been fought in Georgia. That's up in northwestern Georgia, in the Valley and Ridge region, that area. But there's a great quote from Oglethorpe on that monument. He says, "We are resolved not to suffer defeat. We will rather die like Leonidas and his Spartans if we can but protect Georgia and Carolina and the rest of the Americans from desolation." Gives you some insight into how serious Oglethorpe is about defending South Carolina and Georgia. Hey.
What you want to do? It's not raining right now, but
Let's
start again at 3.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do.
Homeroom.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It'd be easier.
Okay, and I'll take Jennifer's first, and then bring them over.
Okay.
To you across the street.
That'll work. Thanks. Where was I? can but protect Georgia and Carolina and the rest of the Americans from desolation. So what he's saying is that we're prepared to die to protect Georgia and the Carolinas and the rest of the Americas. Okay, so again, the seriousness of Oglethorpe at this guy. This is Bloody Marsh today. You can see there's a pier extending out, surrounded by homes today. One of the questions that we wanted to answer is what happens to the trustee colony? Well, it's pretty simple. It ends. The trustee period ends. But why? Well, partly because Oglethorpe is recalled to England. 1743, there are rumors that are started. There are charges that are filed against Oglethorpe, and he has to go back to England to answer for those. Basically, he's put on trial. He appears before Parliament, and he's cleared of the charges. The charges basically said that he had acted improperly during the battle for St. Augustine. Testifies before Parliament. They agree with him. No, he acted properly. But Oglethorpe never comes back to Georgia. Place that has been his home for 10 years, he leaves, never to return. He gets married while he's in England. I'm sure that had was part of the reason. And I'm sure he was just tired. An incredibly difficult job that he was asked to do. And Georgia has a lot of problems when Oglethorpe leaves. People are wanting to buy and sell rum, not necessarily to drink, although I'm sure that's part of it. But it's an opportunity to make money. So in 742, the law is repealed and they're able to buy and sell rum. After that, after Oglethorpe leaves, the colony is governed by a president and 4 assistants. Not a president like you're thinking of. Nothing like a president that you're thinking of. They are basically just representing the trustees. They're located in Savannah. Probably the most important thing they do is they act as a court of appeals from the local courts. Local courts have been established. They're lawyers in Georgia now. Basically, they just represent the trustees. That's it. They don't make law. They somewhat enforce law. They just represent the trustees. Again, very difficult because of the time and the distance involved in communicating. Georgia does elect its first assembly in 1751, but it is not what we would think of today. They're basically, again, representing the people to the trustees, but they can't make law. They can just recommend. And so they're making recommendations to the trustees. Now, people still want to own more land. They want to own slaves. And so by 1750, both laws against land ownership and slave ownership have been repealed. Prior to 1750, there were slaves in Georgia. They were rented. People who owned big chunks of land in Georgia would rent slaves from slave owners in South Carolina. Wasn't totally illegal, wasn't totally legal. But after 1750, those laws are repealed and slavery becomes an issue in Georgia, and it will be for the next 115 years or so. But under the new law, people can own as much land and as many slaves as they can afford. 1752, Oglethorpe's been gone for almost 10 years now. The trustees return the charter to King George II, and Georgia becomes a royal colony. And that takes us to what we call the royal period. Miss Lee has some stuff to give you real quick, so please be very quiet, listen to her, and we will vocabulary quiz tomorrow. and we will start talking about Georgia's royal period. Yes, you do. Drill is in the Kids Center.